Throughout the life of Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, we have seen various forms of upgrades. Flat Awakenings are the obvious, but there have also been upgrades to units' kits. Ability Awakenings, which required Chris, Latent Abilities, which required Enlightenment Points, Brave Abilities, which required Fortisites, Crown Awakenings, which required Master Crowns, and now we have these Intrinsic Abilities, which apparently also requires Crowns. In the future, at least. For now, I'm happy to just pick them up for free. Intrinsic abilities, despite their name, aren't really intrinsic. In order to activate them, you need to directly equip the ability, which unfortunately isn't very easy to find. And even after that, only one of these is actually an ability, while the rest behave more like materias. Regardless, the intrinsic abilities that we've seen so far have been game changers for their associated units. Units who were entirely off the grid suddenly surpassed many new units, while units who were already pretty good got even better. Though the majority of these intrinsic abilities belong to global original units, one of these units happened to be from Japan, giving hope that maybe we'll see some cool things in the future. But enough about that, let's take a look at what we've got here. We'll start in the order of when they were released. Louise. Overclock Cannon gives her a big magic boost, 2000 flat magic, and automatically casts Overclock Cannon at the start of the battle, strengthening the damage modifier for Elena Burst. Mechanically speaking, this doesn't really change her playstyle, as her damage rotation basically remains the same. Taking standalone standards into account, her damage output is still a bit weaker than Magic Roberta, but this new position is actually double her damage output without access to her intrinsic ability. Now when it comes to building her, there are things you can do better, like maybe switch out the equipment, get better variants. It really depends on what you've got and what you're fighting. But given she boasts one of the strongest and easy access gun imperos in the game, you'd likely stick with the 2 Kodundum blasters anyways. Furthermore, her passives are heavily skewed towards dual wielding, not to mention the fact that her guns have arguably strong passives, though it should be noted that they essentially lock her into fire. Regardless, all things considered, it'll likely be a bit challenging to properly build her optimally without dual wielding, as her kit has strong incentives to keep it that way. Mazurka. For the Sake of Friends gives her a big attack boost, 500 flat attack, 3 powerful killer passes, shrink the damage modifier for Brave Shift Blooming Jump, and gives her Warring Spirit. Now Mazurka's Elena Bursts aren't very strong today, but her Brave Shift's Elena Burst does increase the damage modifier of Blooming Jump as well. Given Mazurka's Row Shift, there's very little incentive to stay in her base form, unless you either need a niche ability or lack strong buffs. Furthermore, there's a small handful of equipment that massively raises the potential of jump units, and given Mazurka's non-elemental jump ability, she becomes a strong, flexible finisher. Unfortunately for her though, there happens to be another strong flexible finisher with strong killer passes and a better kit overall. And as they're both jumpers, they also both benefit the same way from certain equipment. So despite the incredible strength from this intrinsic ability, she still remains overshadowed by Roberta. Starlight Elena. Hidden Power gives her a massive 2000 attack and magic buff, then boosts both stats further, and greatly strengthens the damage modifier for active abilities. Interestingly enough, with this intrinsic ability in mind, her Elena Burst pale in comparison to her active abilities, though only so long as she's either at base form or EX plus 1. Once you reach EX plus 2, her Brave Shift's Elena Burst becomes much stronger, especially in Clash of Wills, though without morale modifier she'd once again default to her active abilities. EX plus 3 Celestial Brilliance still remains an optional buff, very powerful when utilized properly, but given Elena's flexibility that might not always be the case. Also, EX plus 3 is very expensive, so for the time being I'll pretend to ignore that. Whether you should stick with her base form or her Brave Shift will heavily depend on your team, what you're fighting, and how she's built, and with that in mind, building her optimally remains fairly difficult. Her base form still heavily favors dual wielding, and the current equipment needed to unlock her locked passive aren't particularly optimal for it. While it would be great if you could build her with a single weapon like I did here, it doesn't particularly leave much room for stuff like killers. Obviously it's great if I don't need to worry about that, but I mean, yeah, I'll probably have to worry about that. Now, ultimately in terms of damage comparison, her standalone strength drastically improves from her initial release, able to compete with Knights of Grinshout and Dragoon Kane. Now obviously if you don't choose to use water or light, she'll need support to prove her mettle, but that only gives her more points as she's flexible that way. In Clash of Wills, her strength rises to the top 10 there, around the strength of Magic Bravia or Roberta, and while that's not particularly close to the strength of the best, it's still a very respectable placement. Yoshikiri, EA Start, is a cooldown ability with a 5-turn cooldown. The ability itself is pretty powerful, granting one ally a 400% full stat buff, a 300% Elena Burst damage buff, a massive 200% double killer against both humans and machines, and inflicts a 35% throwing weapon imperil. Unfortunately, though the ability itself is pretty potent, the effect duration only lasts 2 turns, which is pretty strange that they'd hold back on this ability compared to the buffs he got from his EX awakenings. Overall, the 400% single target stat buff falls behind the other 400% stat buffers. Yoshikiri already has a 300% limit burst damage buff with better influence at EX plus 2, the Machine Killer lets him compete with Clash of Wills Kaido but is still surpassed by Ilmatale, and while that's the best throwing weapon in Peril in the game, it's still for throwing weapons, which at the moment is a bit niche. Still, the limit burst damage buff aside, the buffs from this active ability bring even better buffs to the table. It's just that since Yoshikiri's EX Awakenings propelled him to such a significant extent that this ability with its limitations just seemed like the developers decided to hold back with his intrinsic ability. Still pretty good. Skye. Sky High gives Skye 2000 flat attack, boosts attack further, increases the damage modifier for normal attack jump, and gives her 4 strong killers, especially against the current Clash of Wills boss. Now Skye was already a pretty respectable jumper, with even greater potential once you were able to go past standalone standards. The most unfortunate part of these standards is the heavy restriction on external support. Skye could only deal wind damage through her jump attacks as they were element locked, and had no way to spread elemental advantages to other parts of her kit like her Brave Shift Limit Burst. Now obviously with support that issue isn't the issue, and this new intrinsic ability really helps her soar both in and out of Clash of Wills. Even without the high-end jump equipment, Skye's damage output skyrockets all the way past her previous competition, beating out Sid, Orin, Ricard, and ends up landing a bit below Wilk. In Clash of Wills, her limit burst damage is bolstered significantly, and with the new foundation from her intrinsic ability, she's able to enter the top 5 and approach the level of Stormseeker Esther, though she really needs elemental support. Her current passives make it pretty easy to build her optimally, and the new killers do a nice job in helping that regard. Olivera. Peak Crescendo gives him 3000 MP and 1000 magic, boosts both stats by 80%, grants him 4 strong killers that are also fairly new to his kit, and gives him some chain damage boost that can pair with his Trustmaster reward. Olivera primarily prefers to stick with his space form for Clash of Wills, as his Brave Shift lacks morale scaling. With this intrinsic ability, his damage output now rises from a bit above Yigni to way over Yigni, though he's still weaker than Renoa. With Clash of Wills though, his might rises to the top 5, beating out units like Fravia, Elena, Roberta, Louise, though overall still remains below Skye. The killers give some leeway to building him, but as a unit who either deals magic damage or scales off MP, it gets a bit harder to meet both ends. The Dazzling Demoness Vision card is a massive boon to his potential, though I didn't really include that in his damage comparison as Skye didn't have access to jump equipment either. Overall, his new intrinsic ability does a great job at raising his damage, though unfortunately it doesn't really do anything about him being locked to dark. And that's the 6 intrinsic abilities we've seen so far. In terms of improvement, Starlight Elena and Mazurka saw the biggest relative leaps, though that's partially because they're so subpar without them. Skye, Yoshikiri, and Olivera were already pretty good, though it's fair to say that Yoshikiri feels like he got the least impressive upgrade of the bunch. While Louise and Mazurka are now incredible compared to their initial release, the new batch of units have received such massive improvements in terms of damage that the two seem very prototypical. Ultimately, it's fair to say that intrinsic abilities have put out a good showing so far. Despite taking up a materia slot, the buffs they offer easily outweigh the potential loss of not equipping them. It's exciting to think about the future of intrinsic abilities, which units will get them, how far they'll be developed, and just how much better can they become. But I do admit a lot of this is tied to the fact that we're getting these for free. I wonder if 14 crowns is a lot or not.